The gunshot that rang out across the dusty main street of Golden, Colorado in the spring of 1878 was not meant for Rebecca Sinclair, but it changed her life forever nonetheless. She had been standing on the wooden boardwalk outside her father's general store, arranging a display of canned goods in the window, when the bullet shattered the glass mere inches from her face. The explosion of sound and flying shards sent her stumbling backward, her mouth opening in a scream that never came. Instead, she found herself unable to make any sound at all, her voice stolen by the shock and terror of that moment. A strong pair of arms caught her before she hit the ground, and when she looked up into the concerned face of the cowboy who had grabbed her, pulling her to safety behind a water trough, she felt her heart skip for an entirely different reason. Vincent Sawyer had been passing through Golden on his way to deliver a herd of cattle to the stockyards in Denver when the shooting started. He was 24 years old, lean and weathered from years of working under the Colorado sun, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn Stetson and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He had seen the young woman in danger and reacted on instinct, not thinking about his own safety until after he had her secured behind cover. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked urgently, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. She shook her head mutely, her green eyes wide with shock, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. More shots rang out down the street as the town marshal and his deputies exchanged fire with a pair of bank robbers attempting to flee with their stolen goods. Vincent kept himself positioned between Rebecca and the danger, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. When the shooting finally stopped and the robbers lay dead in the street, Vincent helped Rebecca to her feet. She tried to speak to thank him, but the words would not come. Her throat felt tight and closed as though an invisible hand was squeezing it shut. Panic flashed across her face as she realized she could not make herself heard. "It is all right," Vincent said softly, noticing her distress. "You are safe now. That was frightening, but it is over." Rebecca's father, George Sinclair, came rushing out of the store, his face pale with worry. He was a portly man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and spectacles that were always sliding down his nose. When he saw his daughter unharmed, relief flooded his features. "Rebecca, thank God. I saw you fall and I thought." He pulled her into a tight embrace, then noticed the stranger standing nearby. "Did you help my daughter, sir?" Vincent nodded, removing his hat respectfully. "Vincent Sawyer, sir. I just happened to be in the right place." "She is not injured, but I think the shock has affected her." George turned his attention back to Rebecca, studying her face with concern. "Rebecca, sweetheart, are you truly all right?" She nodded, but when she tried to speak, still no sound emerged. Her eyes filled with frustrated tears as she gestured helplessly at her throat. "She cannot speak," George said, his voice heavy with worry. "This happened once before, years ago when she was a child and witnessed a terrible accident. The doctor said it was her mind's way of protecting her from trauma. It took weeks before her voice returned." Vincent felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman before him. She was beautiful, he could not help but notice, with auburn hair pinned up in a simple style and a dusting of freckles across her nose. But more than her physical appearance, it was the intelligence and emotion he could see in her expressive eyes that captured his attention. "I am sure she will recover in time," Vincent said gently. "The important thing is that she was not hurt." George shook Vincent's hand firmly. "I cannot thank you enough for protecting her, Mr. Sawyer. Please, allow me to offer you a meal and a place to stay tonight. It is the least I can do." Vincent had planned to move on immediately, but something made him accept the offer. Perhaps it was the gratitude in the older man's eyes, or perhaps it was the way Rebecca looked at him. her gaze soft and curious despite her obvious distress. Whatever the reason, he found himself agreeing to stay for supper. The Sinclair home was a modest two-story house on the edge of town, painted white with green shutters and a small garden where Rebecca grew vegetables and flowers. Vincent learned over dinner that Rebecca's mother had died 5 years earlier from pneumonia, and since then, Rebecca had been running the household while also helping her father in the store. She was 21 years old, well educated for a woman of her time and place, thanks to her mother's insistence that she attend the local school and her own voracious appetite for reading. Throughout the meal, Rebecca remained silent, though she listened intently to the conversation between her father and Vincent. The cowboy spoke of his work, explaining that he was employed by a large ranch about 30 miles south of Golden. He had started as a simple ranch hand at 16 and had worked his way up to trail boss, responsible for overseeing cattle drives and managing the other cowboys. It was honest, hard work that he took pride in, though he admitted it was a lonely life, always on the move with little time to put down roots. Rebecca's father excused himself after dinner to attend a town council meeting, leaving Vincent and Rebecca alone in the parlor. An awkward silence fell between them at first, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the soft sounds of the evening settling in outside. Vincent watched as Rebecca picked up a piece of embroidery, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the fabric. "That is beautiful work," he said, gesturing to the pattern she was creating. A flush of pleasure colored her cheeks and she smiled, ducking her head shyly. Vincent found himself charmed by the gesture. "Have you always been skilled with your hands?" She nodded, setting down the embroidery to reach for a small slate and piece of chalk that sat on the side table. With careful, neat letters she wrote, "My mother taught me. Thank you for saving me today." "I am glad I was there," Vincent replied honestly. "I hope your voice returns soon. Though I must say you have found an effective way to communicate in the meantime." Rebecca wrote again, "It is frustrating. There is so much I wish to say." "I can only imagine," Vincent said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "If you would like, I could do most of the talking. I am told I have a tendency to ramble when given the chance." The smile that lit up Rebecca's face made something warm unfold in Vincent's chest. She wrote, "I would like that very much." And so Vincent talked. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, the youngest of 5 brothers. He described the vast open spaces he had seen during cattle drives, the way the mountains looked when the sun rose behind them, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. He spoke of the challenges of his work, the difficult decisions he sometimes had to make, the satisfaction of bringing a herd safely to market. Rebecca listened with rapt attention, her eyes never leaving his face, occasionally writing questions on her slate that showed her genuine interest in his stories. When George returned home and found them still talking, or rather Vincent talking and Rebecca listening, he seemed pleased. "I see you two are getting along well," he said with a knowing smile. "Mr. Sawyer, I hope you will consider staying in Golden for a few more days. We have a room we can offer you, and I could use an extra pair of hands at the store if you are willing to work for your keep." Vincent knew he should decline. He had responsibilities waiting for him back at the ranch. But when he glanced at Rebecca and saw the hopeful expression on her face, he found himself agreeing before he could think better of it. The next morning, Vincent reported to the general store and spent the day helping George with various tasks. He hauled heavy sacks of flour and grain, repaired a section of shelving that had come loose, and assisted customers with their purchases. Rebecca worked nearby, managing the account books and helping the women who came in to shop for fabric and household goods. Vincent found his gaze drawn to her repeatedly throughout the day, watching the graceful way she moved, the patient kindness she showed to every customer. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, an elderly woman came into the store looking for a particular type of thread. Rebecca immediately understood what she needed and retrieved it, but when the woman asked about the price, Rebecca could not tell her. Frustration and embarrassment crossed her face as she tried unsuccessfully to make sound emerge from her throat. Vincent stepped in smoothly. "That will be 15 cents, madam." The woman paid and left, but Rebecca's shoulders remained tense. She wrote on her slate, "I hate being so helpless." "You are not helpless," Vincent said firmly. "You knew exactly what she needed and where to find it. You could not speak the price, but that is a temporary difficulty, not a reflection of your capabilities." Rebecca looked at him with such gratitude that Vincent felt his heart constrict. He was beginning to realize that his interest in this young woman went deeper than simple concern for someone who had suffered a frightening experience. Over the following days, Vincent settled into a routine in Golden. He worked at the store during business hours, took his meals with the Sinclairs, and spent his evenings in the parlor with Rebecca. They developed their own system of communication, with Rebecca writing her thoughts and Vincent responding verbally. Sometimes they played checkers or cards. Other times, Vincent would read aloud from one of the many books that lined the shelves in the Sinclair home while Rebecca did her needlework. Vincent learned that Rebecca had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that she expressed through her written words. She was well read in literature, history, and even some scientific subjects, thanks to the extensive library her mother had collected. She had strong opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and Vincent found himself looking forward to their discussions with increasing eagerness. For her part, Rebecca found herself drawn to Vincent in ways she had never experienced before. There had been young men who had shown interest in her over the years, but she had always been too shy to encourage their attention. Even before losing her voice, she had struggled to express her feelings, finding it easier to remain silent than to risk saying the wrong thing. But with Vincent, the silence felt different. He did not seem bothered by it. Instead, he treated her written words with the same respect he would give to spoken conversation, never making her feel diminished or less than. She began to notice little things about him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The gentleness of his hands despite their obvious strength and the calluses from hard work. The patience he showed when teaching her father a better way to stack the heavy goods in the storeroom. The respectful way he spoke to everyone, regardless of their station in life. One evening, about a week after the shooting, Rebecca's father announced that he needed to make a trip to Denver to meet with suppliers and would be gone for 2 days. "Mrs. Henderson next door has agreed to come stay with you, Rebecca," he said. "I know it is not ideal, but I cannot postpone this trip." Vincent, who had been planning to return to the ranch, found himself offering an alternative. "If it would be acceptable, sir, I could remain here and sleep in the barn. That way Mrs. Henderson would not need to leave her own home, and your daughter would still have proper protection." George considered this carefully. It was highly unconventional, but Vincent had proven himself trustworthy over the past week, and Rebecca clearly felt comfortable in his presence. "Very well," he agreed. "But Mrs. Henderson will check in daily, and I expect you to behave with the utmost propriety, Mr. Sawyer." "You have my word, sir," Vincent replied solemnly. After George departed the next morning, Vincent and Rebecca found themselves in a new kind of intimacy. With her father gone, some of the formality that had governed their interactions fell away. Rebecca made breakfast, and they ate together at the small kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. Afterward, They walked to the store together, and Rebecca showed Vincent how to manage the ledgers and process orders. During the lunch hour, when they closed the store briefly, they sat on the boardwalk and watched the activity of the town. Golden was a thriving community, with prospectors passing through on their way to and from the mountain mining camps, ranchers coming in for supplies, and families building lives in the growing settlement. Rebecca wrote on her slate, "Do you ever wish you had a different life? Something more settled?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The work I do is important and I am good at it, but there are nights on the trail when I look up at the stars and wonder what it would be like to have a home to return to, a family. Why have you never married?" Rebecca wrote, "I suppose I never met the right woman," Vincent said, "and my work makes it difficult to court someone properly. I am away for weeks or months at a time." He paused, then added softly, "I think I have been waiting for someone who makes me want to change my life." The look that passed between them in that moment was charged with unspoken meaning. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken, and she had to look away, afraid that her feelings were written too clearly on her face. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Rebecca moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, showing Vincent how to prepare her mother's recipe for beef stew. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized, occasionally brushing against each other in the small space, when lightning flashed particularly close, causing the windows to rattle. Rebecca startled and dropped the wooden spoon she had been holding. Vincent caught her hand instinctively, steadying her. They stood frozen for a heartbeat, hands clasped, close enough that Rebecca could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You are safe," Vincent murmured. "It is just a storm." Rebecca nodded, but she did not immediately pull away. Instead, she found herself memorizing this moment, the warmth of his hand around hers, the way he looked at her as though she was something precious. Slowly, reluctantly, she stepped back and Vincent released her hand. They ate dinner quietly, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to the meal. Afterward, Vincent said he should retire to the barn, but Rebecca shook her head emphatically. She wrote, "The barn will be cold and damp. You can sleep in the guest room. My father would not want you to be uncomfortable." Vincent knew he should refuse, but the thought of spending the night in the leaking barn was not appealing, and he trusted himself to maintain proper boundaries. "All right," he agreed. "Thank you." They spent the evening in the parlor as usual, but the atmosphere felt different, more intimate. Vincent read from a volume of poetry that had been Rebecca's mother's favorite, his deep voice giving life to the romantic verses. Rebecca sat curled in her chair, ostensibly working on her embroidery but mostly just watching him, feeling emotions stir in her chest that she had never felt before. When the clock struck 10, Rebecca stood and wrote, "I should retire. Good night, Vincent." It was the first time she had used his given name in writing, and Vincent noticed. "Good night, Rebecca," he replied softly, using her name with deliberate intent. Rebecca lay awake long into the night, listening to the rain and thinking about the cowboy sleeping down the hall. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this mixture of excitement and comfort, desire and friendship. The realization that she was falling in love with Vincent Sawyer both thrilled and terrified her. What could she possibly offer a man like him? Even if he felt the same way, which she dared not assume, how could she overcome her inability to speak? A man deserved a wife who could talk to him, laugh with him, share her thoughts freely. Unknown to her, Vincent was having similar thoughts in his own room. He had promised himself he would not become attached to anyone, that his wandering lifestyle was not compatible with the kind of relationship he found himself wanting with Rebecca. But it was too late for such resolutions. He was already attached, already imagining a future that seemed impossible given their circumstances. The next day dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the air clean. Vincent and Rebecca walked to the store together, navigating the muddy streets carefully. They were busy throughout the morning with customers who had waited out the storm to do their shopping. During a brief lull, a man came in that Vincent recognized from the ranch. "Sawyer," the man called out. "Been looking for you all over town. Boss needs you back at the ranch right away. We have got a situation with rustlers, and he wants his best man on it." Vincent felt his stomach drop. He looked at Rebecca and saw the same dismay reflected in her eyes. "When does he need me?" Vincent asked. "Soon as possible. I've got a horse waiting for you." Vincent turned to Rebecca, seeing the way her hands twisted together anxiously. "I need to go," he said quietly, "but I will come back. I promise you, Rebecca, I will come back." She nodded, blinking rapidly against tears that threatened to fall. She wanted to tell him not to go, to stay here where it was safe, to stay with her. But the words remained locked inside, and all she could do was watch as he prepared to leave. George returned that afternoon to find his daughter sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming silently down her face. "Rebecca, what has happened? Where is Mr. Sawyer?" She wrote out an explanation, her hand shaking slightly. George read it and then pulled his daughter into an embrace. "If he promised to return, then I believe he will," he said. "Vincent Sawyer strikes me as a man who keeps his word." But days passed with no word from Vincent, and Rebecca began to lose hope. She threw herself into her work at the store, trying to keep busy enough that she would not have time to think about the cowboy who had captured her heart. At night, she lay in bed and practiced trying to speak, forcing air through her vocal cords, desperate to regain the ability to express herself. Nothing worked. The silence remained. 2 weeks after Vincent's departure, a different cowboy came into the store. He was young, perhaps 19, with sun-bleached hair and a friendly face. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Rebecca. "I am looking for the Sinclair residence. I have a message for Miss Rebecca Sinclair." Rebecca's heart leaped. She gestured to herself and then grabbed her slate to write. "I am Rebecca Sinclair." The cowboy looked surprised but recovered quickly. "Madam, I am Sam Fletcher. I work with Vincent Sawyer. He asked me to bring you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened it. Vincent's handwriting was bold and clear. "Dear Rebecca, I apologize for not writing sooner. The situation here has been more complicated than expected. We have been tracking the rustlers through difficult terrain, and I have not had opportunity to send word until now. I think of you constantly and hope that your voice has returned. Please know that I meant what I said. I will come back to you as soon as I am able. Yours, Vincent." Rebecca read the letter 3 times, pressing it against her chest. She looked up at Sam with shining eyes and wrote, "How is he? Is he well? Is he safe?" "He is fine, madam," Sam assured her. "Took a bullet in the shoulder last week, but it was just a graze. The doc patched him up and he is healing nicely. He is a tough one, that Sawyer." Rebecca went pale at the mention of Vincent being shot. Sam quickly added, "I promise you, madam, he is all right, already back to bossing us around like usual." Rebecca wrote frantically, "When will he return?" "Cannot say for certain, madam. Could be another week, could be a month. Depends on how long it takes to settle this rustling business." Sam tipped his hat. "I had best be getting back. Is there anything you would like me to tell him?" Rebecca thought for a moment, then wrote carefully, "Tell him I am waiting and tell him to be careful." Sam nodded. "I will do that, madam. He will be glad to know you are thinking of him." After Sam left, Rebecca felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because she knew Vincent was alive and thinking of her. Worse because she had confirmation that he was in danger and there was nothing she could do about it. She went about her work mechanically, her mind always on the cowboy who had promised to return. That night, she sat at her mother's writing desk and composed a letter, even though she had no way to send it. She poured out all the feelings she could not speak, describing how she had felt when he left, how she thought of him constantly, how she practiced every day trying to regain her voice so that when he returned, she could tell him everything in her heart. Writing it down, even knowing he would not read it, gave her a strange sense of relief. 3 more weeks passed. Rebecca continued working at the store and helping her father manage the household. She began attending the weekly church services again, something she had avoided since losing her voice, because she found the pitying looks from the congregation unbearable. But now, she went and held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of her condition. It was after church on a Sunday morning in early June when Vincent Sawyer rode back into Golden. Rebecca was walking home with her father when she saw the familiar figure on horseback coming down the main street. She stopped dead in her tracks, one hand flying to her chest. Vincent spotted her immediately. He dismounted before his horse, had fully stopped and strode toward her with single-minded purpose. He looked thinner than Rebecca remembered, his face more weathered, and she could see the way he favored his left shoulder slightly. But his eyes were the same, warm and intense as they fixed on her face. "Rebecca," he said, her name a prayer and a promise all at once. She wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms, but propriety and her natural shyness held her back. Instead, she stood frozen, drinking in the sight of him, hardly daring to believe he was really there. George Sinclair, sensing the charged atmosphere between them, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sawyer, welcome back. We are glad to see you safe. Why do you not come to the house? I am sure you could use a good meal and a chance to rest." "Thank you, sir," Vincent said, though his eyes never left Rebecca's face. "I would appreciate that." They walked to the house together, Vincent leading his horse. Rebecca wanted to reach out and touch him, to assure herself he was real, but she kept her hands folded demurely in front of her. Once they arrived, George took Vincent's horse to the barn while Rebecca went inside to prepare food. Vincent followed her into the kitchen, watching as she moved efficiently around the space. "Your voice," he asked quietly. "Has it returned?" Rebecca shook her head, disappointment clear on her face. She reached for her slate, but Vincent gently caught her wrist. "Wait," he said. "Before you write anything, I need to tell you something. I have spent the last 6 weeks thinking about what I want from my life. I have been doing this work for 8 years, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to build anything permanent. I convinced myself I was content with that. But then I met you, and everything changed." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She stared up at Vincent, barely breathing, afraid to hope for what his words seemed to imply. "I know we have known each other for a short time," Vincent continued. "I know there are practical obstacles to overcome, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I want to build a life here in Golden. I want to find work that allows me to stay in one place. And I want to court you properly, Rebecca Sinclair, if you will permit me to." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. She nodded emphatically, a radiant smile breaking across her face. Then she did reach for her slate, writing quickly. "I have been waiting for you to come back. I was so worried when I heard you were shot." "It was nothing," Vincent assured her. "A scratch, no more. The thought of returning to you kept me going through some difficult days." "I tried to get my voice back," Rebecca wrote. "I practice every day, but nothing works. I am sorry." Vincent took the slate from her hands and set it aside. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your voice will return when it is ready, and until then, we will manage just fine. I have learned to hear you in other ways." George chose that moment to return from the barn. He took in the scene before him, his daughter crying happy tears and Vincent Sawyer holding her face with unmistakable tenderness, and he smiled. "I take it you two have come to an understanding." "With your permission, sir, I would like to court your daughter," Vincent said formally, though he did not immediately release Rebecca. "You have my permission and my blessing," George replied. "But I would appreciate it if you would step back a respectful distance before the neighbors see you through the window and start gossiping." Vincent did step back, though reluctantly. Rebecca wiped her eyes and went to embrace her father, who held her close and whispered, "Your mother would have liked him, I think." Over the next few days, Vincent settled into life in Golden. He found work with a local rancher who needed an experienced hand to help manage his growing operation. The job paid less than his previous position, but it allowed him to stay in town, which was all that mattered to Vincent. He rented a small room above the blacksmith shop and threw himself into his new responsibilities. Every evening, after finishing his work and cleaning up, he would call at the Sinclair home to spend time with Rebecca. George acted as chaperone, but he was generous in allowing them privacy to talk, or rather for Vincent to talk and Rebecca to respond through writing. They took walks through town, attended church socials together, and slowly built the foundation of a genuine relationship. Rebecca found that being courted by Vincent gave her a new confidence. She began to care less about what other people thought of her silence. When they attended social gatherings and people stared or whispered, Vincent would take her arm and look at her with such open affection that she felt beautiful and valued despite her inability to speak. One evening in July, they were sitting on the porch swing at the Sinclair home, enjoying the cool evening air after a hot day. Vincent had been telling her about a difficult situation at work, and Rebecca had been offering suggestions through her slate. During a pause in the conversation, Vincent said quietly, "You know, I think I am falling in love with you." Rebecca's hand stilled on the slate. She looked up at him, her green eyes wide and shining in the lamplight spilling from the windows. Carefully she wrote, "I think I am falling in love with you too." Vincent smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made Rebecca's heart flutter. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Rebecca nodded, setting aside her slate. Vincent leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a kiss that spoke of patience and tenderness and promise. Rebecca's eyes drifted closed, and she let herself sink into the moment, into the feeling of being cherished. When they pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I will wait as long as it takes," he murmured. "For your voice, for you to be ready, for whatever comes. I am not going anywhere." August brought scorching heat to Colorado, and with it, a new challenge. A fire broke out in the mountains west of Golden, driven by strong winds and the dry conditions. The whole town mobilized to fight it, with men forming bucket brigades and working around the clock to create fire breaks. Vincent was in the thick of it, using his experience and natural leadership to organize the efforts. Rebecca worked tirelessly as well, helping to coordinate food and water for the firefighters, tending to minor injuries and keeping track of who was where. For 3 days and nights, the battle against the fire raged. Rebecca barely slept, driven by fear for Vincent's safety and determination to do her part. On the 3rd night, exhausted and covered in soot, Vincent stumbled into the church basement where Rebecca was organizing supplies. She took one look at him and immediately guided him to a chair, bringing him water and food. He drank gratefully, then pulled her down to sit beside him. "It is almost out," he said hoarsely. Another few hours and we should have it contained. Rebecca touched his face gently, her expression conveying her relief and concern. She pointed to his hands, which were blistered and raw from wielding tools and hauling equipment. "I have had worse," Vincent said dismissively. But he let her clean and bandage his hands, finding comfort in her gentle ministrations. Other people bustled around them, but in that moment they might as well have been alone. When Rebecca finished wrapping his hands, she picked up a piece of paper and wrote, "You could have been killed." "But I was not," Vincent replied. "I had too much to live for." Rebecca pressed the paper into his hand. On it she had written, "I love you." Vincent's breath caught. He looked at her, seeing the truth of it shining in her eyes, and felt his heart expand with an emotion too big to contain. "I love you too," he said. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." He wanted to kiss her again, but they were surrounded by people, so he settled for squeezing her hand carefully, mindful of his injuries. It was enough for now. The fire was finally extinguished, and life in Golden slowly returned to normal. Vincent's hands healed, and he went back to his work at the ranch. He and Rebecca continued their courtship, growing closer with each passing day. George watched their relationship develop with approval, seeing how happy his daughter was, how much lighter she seemed despite still being unable to speak. In September, as the aspen trees began to turn gold in the mountains, Vincent took Rebecca on a picnic to a beautiful spot by Clear Creek. He had packed a basket with all her favorite foods, and they spread a blanket under a large cottonwood tree. The water rushed by, providing a soothing background sound, and the autumn air was crisp and perfect. After they ate, Vincent said, "Rebecca, I have something important to ask you." She looked at him curiously, tilting her head. Vincent took a deep breath. "I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards, but I also know my own heart, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a home with you, raise children with you if we are blessed with them, and grow old together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother sent it to me when I wrote to her about you. Rebecca Sinclair, will you marry me?" Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth, tears instantly filling her eyes. She nodded frantically, and then, in a moment that surprised them both, she whispered, "Yes." The word was barely audible, rough and scratchy from months of disuse, but it was unmistakably there. Rebecca's eyes went wide with shock. Vincent stared at her in amazement. "You spoke," he said wonderfully. "Rebecca, you spoke." She opened her mouth to try again. "Yes," she whispered once more, the word coming slightly easier this time. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, pouring all his love and happiness into it. Rebecca kissed him back with equal fervor, no longer shy or hesitant, secure in the knowledge of his love for her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Try to say something else," he encouraged. Rebecca took a deep breath, concentrating. "I love you," she whispered. Her voice was still quiet and hesitant, but each word came a little more easily than the last. "I love you, Vincent." "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "God, I love you so much." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking quietly. Rebecca's voice grew stronger with each sentence, though she still had to concentrate, and her throat grew tired quickly. But the important thing was that she could speak again, that the psychological block that had held her silent for so long had finally broken. When they returned to town and shared the news with George, he wept with joy. His daughter was engaged to a good man, and she had her voice back. It was more than he had dared hope for. The wedding was planned for November, giving Rebecca time to prepare and to continue strengthening her voice. She worked with the doctor, who gave her exercises to help rebuild her vocal stamina. Slowly but surely, she regained her full ability to speak, though she remained somewhat soft-spoken and thoughtful with her words, never taking for granted the gift she had lost and regained. Vincent continued working at the ranch, but he began making plans for the future. He had saved money over his years of work, and he used it to purchase a small piece of land on the outskirts of Golden. It was not much, just 10 acres with a creek running through it, but it was theirs. He began building a house there, working every spare moment he had, determined to have a home ready for his bride. Other men from town, impressed by Vincent's work ethic and his obvious devotion to Rebecca, volunteered to help with the construction. George contributed materials from his store at cost. By late October, the house was complete. It was a simple structure, just 4 rooms, but it was well built and sturdy, with a large fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. Rebecca visited the property for the first time a week before the wedding. Vincent led her through each room, pointing out features he had specifically designed with her in mind. A large kitchen with a good stove and plenty of counter space. Built-in bookshelves in the parlor for her extensive collection, a bedroom that faced east so they could watch the sunrise together. "It is perfect," Rebecca said softly, her voice still quiet but clear. "Vincent, it is absolutely perfect. You are sure?" he asked anxiously. "It is not very grand." "I do not want grand," Rebecca assured him. "I want a home, and that is exactly what you have built for us." The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the small church in Golden. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, with her auburn hair pinned up and decorated with late blooming roses that Vincent had somehow managed to find. She looked radiant as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Vincent waited at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, looking more nervous than Rebecca had ever seen him. But when she reached his side and he took her hands in his nerves seemed to settle. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, meaning every word. When the minister pronounced them man and wife and Vincent kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause. Rebecca felt joy bubbling up inside her, pure and effervescent. She was married to the man she loved, she had her voice back, and her future stretched out before her filled with promise. The reception was held at the Sinclair home, with food and drink and music. Rebecca and Vincent danced together, swaying to the fiddle music, lost in each other's eyes. Later, they cut the cake that Mrs. Henderson had made, laughing when Vincent got frosting on Rebecca's nose and then kissed it off. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode out to their new home. Vincent carried Rebecca over the threshold, both of them grinning like children. He set her down gently in the parlor and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, hardly believing this was real. "Hello, Mrs. Sawyer," Vincent said softly. "Hello, Mr. Sawyer," Rebecca replied, her voice warm with love. They spent their wedding night discovering each other, learning the geography of bodies and hearts, expressing physically what they had already known emotionally. Vincent was gentle and patient, making sure Rebecca felt safe and cherished. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both were completely content. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as all new marriages are. Rebecca had to learn to manage a household on her own, without her father's presence or the familiar surroundings she had known all her life. Vincent had to adapt to sharing his space and considering someone else's needs and preferences. But they approached these challenges as a team, talking through disagreements and compromising when necessary. Rebecca continued to help her father at the store a few days a week, while also establishing her own routines at home. She planted a winter garden, preserved food for the cold months ahead, and began working on sewing projects. Vincent came home each evening to find the house warm and welcoming, with the smell of good food cooking and his wife ready to greet him with a kiss. They talked endlessly, making up for the months when Rebecca could not speak. She told him stories from her childhood, her memories of her mother, her dreams for their future. He shared more about his past, his complicated relationship with his brothers, his early struggles to find his place in the world. They learned each other's quirks and habits, the small things that make up the fabric of daily life together. In January, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one evening after dinner, simply and directly, watching his face transform from surprise to absolute delight. "A baby." He said wonderingly, "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, smiling at his reaction. "Sometime in August, the doctor thinks." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she was made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he murmured against her hair. "I cannot believe it." "You will be a wonderful father," Rebecca assured him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as winter turned to spring and then summer, Rebecca's belly grew round with their child. Vincent became even more protective and attentive, if that was possible. He worried constantly about her health and comfort, making sure she was not working too hard, bringing her little gifts and treats to make her smile. George was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He had already begun carving toys for the baby, working in his spare time to create a whole collection of wooden animals and blocks. On a hot August night, Rebecca's labor began. Vincent rode frantically to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, who would assist with the birth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Vincent paced outside the bedroom, growing more anxious with each hour that passed. Finally, in the late afternoon, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's lusty cry. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. Sawyer, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Vincent rushed into the room to find Rebecca propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached almost reverently. When Rebecca pulled back the blanket to show him the baby's face, he felt his heart expand impossibly. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already trying to focus his eyes. "He is perfect," Vincent breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Rebecca asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on one. Vincent looked down at his son, then at his wife. "What about James, after your father's middle name, James Sawyer?" Rebecca smiled. "James Sawyer. I love it." Little James proved to be a content baby, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Vincent was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and changings, never complaining about the sleepless nights or the disruption to their routine. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle of this tiny life they had created together. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, Vincent and Rebecca's love deepened and matured. They weathered the challenges of parenthood together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the joys. Their property slowly expanded as Vincent saved money and purchased adjacent land. He began raising his own small herd of cattle, building the foundation of what he hoped would become a prosperous ranch. Rebecca found fulfillment in being a wife and mother, but she also maintained her own interests. She helped her father at the store when she could, taught Sunday school at the church, and continued her voracious rating. She and Vincent would discuss politics and current events, books and ideas, maintaining the intellectual connection that had been part of their relationship from the beginning. When James was 2 years old, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to twin girls. They named them Catherine and Elizabeth, and Vincent joked that he was now hopelessly outnumbered by the women in his life. The twins were beautiful babies with their mother's green eyes and auburn hair. They were also a handful, keeping both parents constantly busy. James, now old enough to be a helpful big brother, took his role seriously, always wanting to assist with caring for his baby sisters. George Sinclair, now a grandfather of 3, was happier than he had been in years. He spent every spare moment with his grandchildren, spoiling them shamelessly. His health had begun to decline somewhat, and he started talking about retiring from the store. One evening, as Vincent and Rebecca sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard, Vincent said, "Have you ever regretted it? Marrying me, I mean. Taking on this life." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask such a thing?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Vincent said. "I know this is not the life you might have imagined for yourself." "It is exactly the life I imagined once I met you," Rebecca replied. "You showed me what was possible, Vincent. You waited patiently for me to find my voice in more ways than one. You loved me when I could not speak, and you love me still now that I can. You have given me a home, a family, a purpose. I could not ask for more." Vincent pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I am the lucky one," he murmured. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to settle down, to build something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children. James was carefully showing the twins how to make a tower with wooden blocks, his little face serious with concentration. The twins, barely a year old, were more interested in knocking the blocks down than stacking them, but James patiently rebuilt each time. "We should have your father over for Sunday dinner," Rebecca said. "He mentioned he had not been feeling well. I want to keep a closer eye on him." Vincent nodded. "That is a good idea, and we should talk to him about the store. If he wants to retire, maybe we could take it over. Between your knowledge of the business and my work ethic, we could manage it." "Do you think you would be happy running a store?" Rebecca asked. "You love working with cattle and being outdoors." "I love providing for my family more," Vincent replied. "And the store would be more stable income, especially as the children get older. We could hire someone to manage the ranch while I focus on the business." They discussed the idea further over the following weeks and eventually approached George with a proposal. He was relieved and grateful, admitting that he had been worried about what would happen to the store when he could no longer manage it. They worked out an arrangement where George would gradually transition ownership to Vincent and Rebecca, staying on to advise as long as his health permitted. The transition happened over the course of the next year. Vincent proved to have a good head for business, expanding the store's inventory and establishing new supplier relationships. Rebecca managed the books and customer service, her gentle manner and attention to detail making her beloved by their clientele. They hired a manager for the ranch, a capable young man who reminded Vincent of himself at that age. George's health continued to decline, and in the autumn of 1884 he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Rebecca grieved deeply for her father, but she took comfort in knowing that he had lived to see her happy and settled, had known his grandchildren, and had died knowing his legacy would continue through the store. Vincent supported her through her grief, taking on extra responsibilities so she could take time to mourn. He had lost his own father years earlier and understood the complex emotions that came with such a loss. Together, they planned a beautiful funeral service, and it seemed like the whole town turned out to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community. After George's death, Rebecca inherited the house where she had grown up. They decided to rent it out, using the income to help fund improvements to the store and their ranch. The house where Vincent had built for them remained their home, though they had expanded it over the years to accommodate their growing family. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and thrived. James was a serious, responsible boy who loved helping his father at the store and learning about the ranch. The twins, Catherine and Elizabeth, were identical in appearance but very different in temperament. Catherine was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief, while Elizabeth was quieter and more contemplative, much like her mother had been at that age. In 1886, Rebecca gave birth to their fourth child, another boy they named Thomas. Vincent joked that he now had reinforcements against the female majority in the household. Thomas was a cheerful, easygoing baby who seemed to take everything in stride. As the years passed, Vincent and Rebecca's relationship continued to deepen. They had been through so much together, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, and their love had only grown stronger. They still made time for each other despite the demands of running a business and raising 4 children, stealing moments alone whenever they could. One evening in the summer of 1888, 10 years after they had first met, Vincent and Rebecca stood on their porch watching a spectacular sunset. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, though the sounds of laughter and running feet suggested otherwise. 10 years, Vincent mused. It does not seem possible. I know, Rebecca agreed. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you pulled me behind that water trough, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Do you remember how frightened you looked? Vincent asked. Those big green eyes so wide and scared. I remember thinking you were the most handsome man I had ever seen, Rebecca admitted with a smile. Even covered in dust and looking worried, Vincent laughed. I thought you were beautiful, even in shock and covered in broken glass. We have come a long way from that day, Rebecca said softly. We have, Vincent agreed. He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. I meant what I said back then, you know, about waiting for your words to start. I would have waited forever if necessary. I know you would have, Rebecca replied. That is why I love you. You saw past my silence to who I really was. You never made me feel like I was less because I could not speak. You were never less, Vincent said firmly. You were always exactly who you needed to be. They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of love, purpose, and meaning. Inside the house, their children's voices rose in some dispute that would need to be settled. Tomorrow, there would be the store to run, the ranch to manage, the endless tasks that made up their daily lives. But in that moment, there was just the 2 of them, hand in hand, hearts entwined, facing the future together as they always had. I should go deal with whatever crisis is happening in there, Rebecca said with a sigh. Let me, Vincent offered. You sit and enjoy the last of the sunset. He kissed her gently and went inside. Rebecca could hear his voice, firm but loving, as he herded the children toward bed. She smiled, resting her hand on her stomach where a 5th child was just beginning to grow. A secret she had not yet shared even with Vincent. Their family would keep growing, their business would continue to prosper, and their love would remain the foundation on which everything else was built. Rebecca thought back to that shy, silent girl she had been, too frightened to speak her heart, and marveled at how much she had changed. Vincent had given her the patience and space she needed to find her voice, and in doing so, he had given her everything. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joys and challenges. Rebecca gave birth to their fifth child in early 1889, a daughter they named Margaret. By this time, James was nearly 11 years old and already showing signs of the man he would become, responsible and hardworking like his father, but with his mother's thoughtful nature and love of learning. The twins, Catherine and Elizabeth, were now 7 and already making their marks on the world in their own distinct ways. Catherine had announced her intention to become a rancher like her father, spending every moment she could at their property watching the cattle and asking endless questions. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had discovered a love of music and was learning to play the piano that Rebecca had purchased with some of the profits from the store. Thomas, at 3 years old, was the family comedian, always doing something to make people laugh. He had his father's easy charm and his mother's quick wit, a combination that promised he would be a handful as he grew older. The store continued to thrive under Vincent and Rebecca's management. They had expanded the building, adding a second floor that housed a wider variety of goods. Vincent had also started a mail-order business, allowing ranchers and miners in the more remote areas to place orders that would be delivered once a month. It was innovative for the time and had significantly increased their profits. The ranch, too, was doing well. Their herd had grown to over 200 head of cattle, and they had added horses to their operation. Vincent had hired several hands to help manage the work, creating jobs for young men in the community and building a reputation as a fair and generous employer. Despite their success and the demands on their time, Vincent and Rebecca made sure to prioritize their relationship and their family. Sunday dinners were sacred time when the whole family gathered together, no matter what else was happening. Vincent and Rebecca also maintained the tradition of sitting on the porch together in the evenings when weather permitted, talking about their day and making plans for the future. In 1891, when James turned 13, he began working at the store in earnest, learning the business from the ground up. He was a natural at it, with his father's work ethic and his mother's attention to detail. Vincent and Rebecca began to see that they were building not just a business but a legacy that could be passed down to their children. It was in this same year that Golden, Colorado experienced a brief but intense period of lawlessness. A gang of outlaws had been operating in the area, robbing stage coaches and isolated homesteads. The town marshal organized a posse to track them down, and Vincent, with his years of experience on the range and his natural leadership abilities, was asked to join. Rebecca was terrified at the prospect of Vincent going into danger. The memory of that day 10 years earlier, when the bullet had shattered the store window, was still vivid in her mind. But she also knew that Vincent was the kind of man who would not sit idle when his community needed him. "Please be careful," she said as he prepared to leave. "Think of me, of the children." "I will be back," Vincent promised, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I have too much to live for to take unnecessary risks." The posse tracked the outlaws for 5 days before finally cornering them in an abandoned mining camp in the mountains. There was a tense standoff, followed by a brief exchange of gunfire. When it was over, 3 of the outlaws were dead and 2 had surrendered. Vincent returned home with a bullet hole in his hat and a story he would tell for years about how close the shot had come. Rebecca cried when she saw him ride up to the house, relief overwhelming her. She had spent those 5 days in a state of constant anxiety, trying to maintain a normal routine for the children while her mind conjured worst-case scenarios. When Vincent dismounted and she flew into his arms, she held him so tightly he joked that she would crack his ribs. "Do not ever do that to me again," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I cannot promise that," Vincent said honestly. "But I can promise that I will always do everything in my power to come home to you." It was a reminder, if they needed one, that life was unpredictable and precious. They held each other a little tighter after that, appreciating the ordinary moments as much as the extraordinary ones. As the 1890s progressed, the American West was changing rapidly. The era of the open range was ending, replaced by fenced ranches and more settled communities. Railroads had connected even remote areas, bringing goods and people more efficiently. Golden grew from a rough frontier town into a prosperous small city with schools, churches, and all the amenities of modern civilization. Vincent and Rebecca adapted to these changes, always looking for ways to improve their business and provide better for their family. They added a section of ready-made clothing to the store, recognizing that not every woman had the time or skill to sew everything her family needed. They invested in new equipment for the ranch, improving their operations efficiency. Their children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. James, serious and responsible, was clearly being groomed to take over the family businesses someday. The twins, now teenagers, were beginning to think about their futures. Catherine still wanted to ranch, while Elizabeth had discovered a talent for teaching and hoped to attend normal school to become certified. Thomas, now 8 years old, was fascinated by everything mechanical and spent hours taking apart and reassembling anything he could get his hands on. Vincent predicted he would be an engineer or inventor someday. Little Margaret, at 5, was too young to have defined ambitions yet, but she showed signs of having inherited her mother's love of books and learning. In 1895, Vincent and Rebecca celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Vincent planned a special dinner at the nicest restaurant in Denver, arranging for the children to stay with friends so they could have a night alone together. It was a rare luxury, and Rebecca dressed in her finest gown. Her auburn hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver, pinned up elegantly. Over dinner, they reminisced about their years together, laughing at memories of early struggles and marveling at how much their lives had changed. "Do you remember our first house?" Rebecca asked. "It seemed so big and grand at the time, and now it seems so small." "It was perfect for us then," Vincent replied. "Everything we needed and nothing we did not. We have been blessed," Rebecca said softly. 5 healthy children, a successful business, good friends, and each other. What more could anyone ask for? "Nothing," Vincent agreed. "Though I would not object to dancing with my beautiful wife if the opportunity presented itself." There was a small orchestra playing at the restaurant, and Vincent led Rebecca to the dance floor. They moved together with the ease of long practice, fitting together perfectly after so many years. Other diners watched them with smiles, recognizing the genuine affection between the well-dressed couple. As they danced, Vincent said quietly, "I love you more now than I did the day we married. I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I know," Rebecca replied. "I feel the same way." Every year, every challenge we face together, every joy we share, it just makes the love deeper and stronger. They stayed in Denver overnight, a rare indulgence, and returned home the next day refreshed and reconnected. The children greeted them enthusiastically, all talking at once about their adventures while their parents were away. Life quickly returned to its normal hectic pace, but both Vincent and Rebecca carried the memory of that special evening with them. The turn of the century brought more changes. James, now 21, had taken on significant responsibilities in both the store and the ranch. He was courting a sweet young woman named Alice Hampton, and Vincent and Rebecca expected an engagement announcement any day. The twins had graduated from school. Catherine was working full-time on the ranch, shocking some people with her unconventional choice, but earning respect with her skill and dedication. Elizabeth had indeed attended normal school and was now teaching at the elementary school in Golden. Thomas, at 13, was apprenticing with the blacksmith in town, learning metalworking and mechanical repair. Margaret, now 10, was top of her class and had already announced her intention to attend university someday, an ambitious goal for a young woman but one her parents supported fully. Vincent was now 46 years old, his dark hair liberally streaked with gray, lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But he was still strong and vital, still capable of a full day's hard work. Rebecca, at 43, remained beautiful in his eyes, her quiet strength and gentle wisdom only enhanced by maturity. They had built something remarkable together, not just in terms of material success, but in the family they had created and the life they had lived. Their love, which had begun in such unusual circumstances, had proven strong enough to withstand every test. One evening in the summer of 1902, Vincent and Rebecca sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their children were all out pursuing their own interests. James was at Alice's house for dinner with her family. The twins were at various social activities. Thomas was working on a project in the barn. Margaret was at a friend's house studying. "It is quiet," Rebecca observed. "Strange, is it not, after so many years of constant noise and activity?" "I suppose we should get used to it," Vincent said. "The children are growing up and moving on with their lives. Soon it will be just the two of us again." "Just like it started," Rebecca said with a smile. "Not quite," Vincent corrected. "We are much older and wiser now. And hopefully better at communication." Rebecca laughed. "I should hope so, though I must say you did remarkably well at communicating even when I could not speak." "I learned to read you in other ways," Vincent said. "Your expressions, your gestures, the way you moved, I still do that, you know. Sometimes I know what you are thinking before you say it." "And I you," Rebecca replied. "That is what happens when two people spend 24 years together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood trees Vincent had planted when they first built the house. "Vincent," Rebecca said after a while, "do you ever think about that day? The day we met?" "Of course," he replied. "I think about it often. How a random moment, a split-second decision to pull you to safety changed the entire course of my life." "Mine too," Rebecca said. "If not for that bullet, if not for you being there at exactly that moment, everything would have been different." "Do you believe in fate?" Vincent asked. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I think I believe that some things are meant to be. I do not know if every detail is predetermined, but I think you and I were meant to find each other somehow." "I like that idea," Vincent said, reaching over to take her hand. "The thought that no matter what, we would have found our way to each other." "You waited for me," Rebecca said softly. "You waited patiently while I found my voice, while I learned to trust, while I became brave enough to love. Not many men would have done that." "You were worth waiting for," Vincent replied simply. "You still are." In September of that year, James married Alice in a beautiful ceremony at the church. Vincent and Rebecca watched their eldest son speak his vows, and both were overcome with emotion. It seemed like just yesterday that James had been a tiny baby in Rebecca's arms, and now here he was, a man starting his own family. The wedding was a joyous occasion, with the whole community turning out to celebrate. Alice was a lovely young woman, kind and intelligent, and she fit seamlessly into the Sawyer family. Rebecca saw in Alice's eyes the same look of love and devotion she had felt for Vincent all those years ago, and she was glad her son had found someone worthy of him. A year later, Catherine surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to the ranch manager, Daniel Cooper. He was 6 years older than Catherine, a quiet, competent man who shared her passion for ranching. Vincent had some reservations about his daughter marrying at just 19, but Rebecca pointed out that she herself had been only 21 when they married, and Catherine was far more mature and worldly than Rebecca had been at that age. "She knows her own mind," Rebecca told Vincent. "And Daniel is a good man. He will treat her well and support her dreams." The wedding was smaller than James's had been, held at the ranch with just close family and friends. Catherine wore a simple dress and boots, refusing to put on fancy shoes even for her wedding day, which made everyone laugh. But she was radiant with happiness, and Daniel looked at her as though she hung the moon. Elizabeth became engaged shortly after to a fellow teacher named Robert Morrison. They planned a longer engagement, wanting to save money and establish themselves professionally before marrying. Vincent approved of the young man's sensible approach and his obvious respect for Elizabeth's intelligence and career. By 1905, Vincent and Rebecca were grandparents 3 times over. James and Alice had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Catherine and Daniel had a son, whom Catherine was already teaching to ride despite his being barely 2 years old. More grandchildren were surely on the way, and Vincent joked that he would need to expand the house just to fit everyone for Sunday dinners. Thomas, now 18, had decided to attend the Colorado School of Mines to study engineering. It was a prestigious program, and his parents were immensely proud, though Rebecca worried about him being away from home. Margaret, at 14, was already making plans for her own education, talking about attending the University of Denver to study literature. Vincent and Rebecca had gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the store and ranch, turning over more responsibility to James and Catherine. It gave them more time to enjoy each other and their grandchildren, to pursue interests they had set aside during the busy years of building their business and raising their family. Rebecca had become active in the local library committee, working to expand the collection and improve access to books for all members of the community. Vincent served on the town council, using his business acumen and his reputation as a fair and honest man to help guide Golden's continued growth and development. They took a trip to San Francisco in 1906, their first real vacation in years. They visited museums and restaurants, walked along the waterfront, and marveled at the bustling modern city. It was exciting and exotic, but when they returned to Golden, both agreed that there was no place they would rather be than home. "Cities are fine to visit," Vincent said as they pulled up to their house, "but I will take the mountains and the open sky any day." "Agreed," Rebecca said. "This is where we belong." The years continued their steady march. Elizabeth married Robert in 1907, and Thomas graduated from the School of Mines in 1909 with top honors. He was immediately offered a position with a mining company in Leadville, but he chose to return to Golden instead, starting his own business designing and building equipment for ranches and mines. Margaret, true to her word, attended the University of Denver and graduated with honors in 1913. She became a teacher like her sister, but she also began writing, publishing articles and eventually short stories in regional magazines. Her parents read everything she wrote with pride, marveling at her talent with words. Vincent turned 60 in 1914, and Rebecca organized a surprise party that brought together family, friends, and business associates from throughout their lives. Vincent was genuinely shocked when he walked into the church hall and found it packed with people. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared and memories recounted. It was a testament to the life he had built, the relationships he had nurtured, the respect he had earned. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she stood and looked at her husband with eyes still full of love after more than 30 years of marriage. "When I met Vincent Sawyer," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I could not speak. I had lost my voice to fear and trauma. But Vincent did not need my words. He saw who I was beneath the silence. He waited patiently while I healed, while I found the courage to speak not just with my voice but with my heart. He has been my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. Everything good in my life stems from that day when he pulled me to safety behind a water trough in the middle of a gunfight." The crowd laughed at the image, and Vincent grinned. Rebecca continued, "Vincent taught me what it means to love unconditionally, to support without smothering, to challenge while still accepting. He gave me 5 beautiful children who have grown into remarkable adults. He built a life with me that I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams. Happy birthday, my love. Here is to many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Vincent stood to embrace his wife, not caring that everyone was watching. He kissed her soundly, to applause and cheers, and when they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. The party lasted well into the night, and when they finally returned home, exhausted but happy, Rebecca said, "I think that went well." Vincent laughed. "You are very pleased with yourself, are not you?" "I am," Rebecca admitted. "I love seeing you surrounded by people who care about you, who recognize what a good man you are." "I am only as good as the woman beside me makes me," Vincent said seriously. "You are my better half, Rebecca. You always have been." World events intruded on their peaceful existence when the Great War began in Europe. Though America did not enter the conflict until 1917, the effects were felt even in Golden. Thomas's engineering skills made him valuable, and he was recruited to work on military projects. Young men from the community enlisted or were drafted, including 2 of James's sons, now grown to manhood. It was a difficult time, filled with worry and uncertainty. Rebecca threw herself into war work, organizing knitting circles to make socks and scarves for soldiers, coordinating food drives, and writing letters to local boys overseas. Vincent, too old to fight but still wanting to contribute, helped organize bond drives and used his business connections to ensure supplies reached where they were needed. When the war finally ended in 1918, the family was fortunate that all their boys came home safely, though some carried scars both visible and invisible. The community rallied around its returning veterans, and Vincent hired several of them to work at the ranch and the store, grateful for their service and wanting to help them reintegrate into civilian life. The 1920s brought both prosperity and change. The store adapted to new consumer demands, adding modern conveniences like ready-made clothing and household appliances. The ranch continued to thrive, now primarily run by Catherine and Daniel with assistance from their grown sons. James had taken over management of the store completely, bringing in his own children to learn the business as he had done. Vincent and Rebecca, now in their 60s, were fully retired. They spent their days reading, gardening, visiting with their numerous grandchildren and growing number of great-grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They took walks together every day that weather permitted, moving more slowly than they once had but still hand in hand, still talking and laughing together. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, their children organized another celebration, this one focused entirely on family. All 5 children were there with their spouses and children, filling the house to bursting with noise and laughter and love. Looking around at the family they had created, Vincent and Rebecca felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Vincent stood to make a toast. 40 years ago, he said, I married the woman of my dreams. She could not speak on our wedding day, having only just regained her voice, but she did not need to. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know. In the 40 years since, she has filled my life with words of love, wisdom, and humor. She has given me 5 incredible children, helped me build a successful business, and made every single day worth living. Rebecca, my love, you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I love you more today than I thought possible all those years ago. Rebecca stood and took his hand. And I love you, she replied. You waited for me to find my voice, and when I did, you listened to every word. You have been my rock, my safe harbor, my greatest adventure. Thank you for 40 wonderful years. I look forward to however many more we are blessed to share. They kissed, surrounded by their family, and there was not a dry eye in the room. The 1920s turned into the 1930s, bringing the Great Depression that affected even prosperous families like the Sawyers. But the foundation they had built was strong, and by helping each other and their community, they weathered the economic storm. The store became a lifeline for many families, with James extending credit and accepting barter when cash was scarce, just as his father would have done. Vincent's health began to decline as he entered his 70s. He developed arthritis that made moving painful, and his once sharp eyesight began to fail. But his mind remained keen, and he still enjoyed sitting on the porch with Rebecca, discussing current events and family news. Rebecca, too, showed signs of age. Her hair was now completely silver, and she moved more slowly than she once had. But her voice remained strong, and she used it often, reading to her great-grandchildren, sharing stories of the old days, making sure the family history was preserved. In the spring of 1935, Vincent suffered a stroke that left him weakened and partly paralyzed. The doctor was blunt about his prognosis, saying that Vincent had perhaps a few months left at most. The family gathered, wanting to spend as much time as possible with the patriarch who had built their legacy. Vincent faced his approaching death with equanimity. He had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had built something lasting. His only regret was that he would have to leave Rebecca behind. On a warm May evening, as the sun set over the mountains he had loved all his life, Vincent lay in bed with Rebecca beside him, holding his hand as she had held it thousands of times before. I am not afraid, he told her quietly. I have had a good life, the best life. Because of you, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Vincent corrected gently. We were a team always. Promise me you will be all right without me. I promise to try, Rebecca said. But it will be hard. You have been my heart for 57 years. And you have been mine, Vincent said. He smiled, that warm smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. Do you remember the day we met, how terrified you looked? I remember thinking you were my hero, Rebecca replied. And you have been, every day since. I was just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time, Vincent said. But I am grateful for that moment every single day of my life. They talked quietly as the light faded, reminiscing about their years together, saying all the things that needed to be said. As night fell and the first stars appeared, Vincent's breathing became more labored. Rebecca held his hand tighter, leaning close so he could see her face clearly. I love you, she whispered. I will love you forever. And I love you, Vincent replied, his voice barely audible. My beautiful Rebecca, thank you for being my wife, my partner, my everything. Those were his last words. He slipped away peacefully, with Rebecca's hand in his and her face the last thing he saw. She sat with him for a long time after he was gone, not quite ready to let go, to accept that this chapter of her life had ended. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town of Golden and people from miles around. Vincent Sawyer had been respected and loved by all who knew him, and they came to pay their respects and support his grieving family. Rebecca stood strong through the service, though her heart was breaking. She knew Vincent would want her to be brave, to carry on, to live fully even in his absence. In the months after Vincent's death, Rebecca struggled to find her footing. Everything reminded her of him. The house they had built together, the store they had run, the family they had created. But she was surrounded by love and support from her children and grandchildren. And slowly, she began to heal. She lived for another 7 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She saw more great-grandchildren born, attended more weddings and celebrations, and continued to be the matriarch of the sprawling Sawyer clan. But those who knew her best could see that part of her was always with Vincent, waiting to be reunited. Rebecca passed away peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1942 at the age of 85. She was buried next to Vincent in the Golden Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town they had helped build. The headstone read, "Vincent and Rebecca Sawyer, 2 hearts, 1 love forever." Their children gathered at the gravesite after the funeral, looking out over the view their parents would have appreciated. James, now 64 himself, spoke for all of them. They loved each other from the moment they met until the moment they died. They built something beautiful together, not just in terms of business or property, but in the family they created and the love they shared. We are all here because of them, because a shy young woman found the courage to love and a patient cowboy waited for her to find her voice. That is a legacy worth honoring. His siblings and their families murmured agreement. The Sawyer family would continue for generations, carrying forward the values Vincent and Rebecca had instilled in them, telling the story of how their love had begun in the Wild West of 1878 and lasted until death and beyond. And on quiet evenings in Golden, Colorado, when the sun sets over the mountains and the wind rustles through the cottonwood trees, some people swear they can still see 2 figures sitting on a porch, hand in hand, talking and laughing together, their love transcending even death itself. Their story became legend in Golden, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of patience, the strength of true love, and the beauty of waiting for someone to find their voice. It was a reminder that the best things in life are worth waiting for, and that sometimes silence speaks louder than words ever could.